The small, quiet town of Blackwood was known for its rolling hills, dense forests, and a cemetery that dated back centuries. It was a place where time seemed to stand still, and the dead rested in peace, until one man's grief and curiosity unraveled a mystery that would shake the town to its core. Daniel Harper was a broken man. His wife Clara had passed away 6 months ago after a long battle with illness. Her death left a void in his life that he couldn't fill. Every day he visited her grave in the Blackwood cemetery, bringing fresh flowers and talking to her as if she were still there. But lately, something strange had been happening. Each morning, when Daniel arrived at the grave, he noticed that the flowers he had left the day before were gone. At first, he thought it might be animals or the wind, but the flowers were always neatly removed, as if someone had taken them deliberately. One evening, consumed by curiosity and a growing sense of unease, Daniel decided to take matters into his own hands. He purchased a small, discreet hidden camera and installed it on a tree near Clara's grave. The camera was motion-activated and would record any movement during the night. Daniel didn't know what to expect, but he was determined to find out who or what was disturbing his wife's resting place. That night, Daniel barely slept. He tossed and turned, his mind racing with possibilities. Was it a prankster, a grave robber, or something far more sinister? The next morning, he rushed to the cemetery, his heart pounding as he retrieved the camera. He hurried home, plugged the camera into his computer, and began to review the footage. At first, the video showed nothing but the quiet stillness of the cemetery at night. The moonlight cast eerie shadows over the gravestones, and the wind rustled the leaves of the trees. Daniel fast-forwarded through the footage, his impatience growing. Then, at exactly 2:17 a.m., the camera detected motion. Daniel's breath caught in his throat as he watched the screen. A figure appeared, walking slowly toward Clara's grave. It was a woman dressed in a long, flowing white gown. Her hair was dark, and her face was pale, almost ghostly. Daniel's hands trembled as he leaned closer to the screen. The woman knelt by the grave, her movements graceful and deliberate. She picked up the flowers Daniel had left and held them to her chest, as if cherishing them. But then, something happened that made Daniel's blood run cold. The woman turned her head and looked directly at the camera. Her eyes glowed with an unnatural light, and her lips curled into a faint, knowing smile. Daniel froze, his heart pounding in his chest. It was Clara. His Clara. But how could it be? She was dead. He had buried her himself. Panicked and confused, Daniel replayed the footage over and over, hoping he had imagined it. But there was no mistake. The woman in the video was his wife. Desperate for answers, Daniel decided to confront the truth head-on. That night, he returned to the cemetery, armed with a flashlight and a knife, though he wasn't sure what good it would do against whatever, or whoever, he was dealing with. He hid behind a tree near Clara's grave and waited. The hours dragged on, and the cemetery grew colder and darker. Just as Daniel was about to give up, he saw her. The woman in white appeared again, walking slowly toward the grave. Daniel's heart raced as he stepped out from his hiding place, his flashlight shining directly on her. "Clara?" he whispered, his voice trembling. The woman turned to face him, and Daniel's knees nearly gave out. It was her. Her face, her eyes, her smile. It was Clara. But something was different. Her skin was unnaturally pale, and her eyes held a sadness that Daniel had never seen before. "Daniel," she said softly, her voice echoing as if it came from far away. "Why are you here?" I saw you on the camera," Daniel stammered. "How is this possible? You're gone." Clara's expression softened. "I never left you, Daniel. I couldn't. Not after what happened." Daniel's mind raced. "What do you mean? What happened?" Clara hesitated, then reached out and touched his hand. Her skin was cold, like ice. "The night I died, it wasn't an illness, Daniel. I was poisoned, and the person who did it is still out there." Daniel's world spun. Poisoned? Who would want to harm Clara? She was loved by everyone in town. But before he could ask more questions, Clara's form began to fade. "Wait," Daniel cried, reaching out to her. "Don't go, tell me who did this." But Clara was already disappearing, her figure dissolving into the night air. "Find the truth, Daniel," her voice whispered. "Find the truth before it's too late." And then she was gone. Daniel stood alone in the cemetery, his mind reeling. He didn't know what to believe, but one thing was clear. Clara's death was no accident. Someone had killed her, and he was going to find out who. Over the next few weeks, Daniel became obsessed with uncovering the truth. He dug through old medical records, interviewed Clara's friends and co-workers, and even confronted the doctor who had signed her death certificate. But the more he dug, the more dangerous things became. He started receiving anonymous threats, warning him to stop his investigation. His house was broken into, and his computer was stolen. But Daniel refused to back down. Finally, he found a lead. Clara's best friend, Sarah, had been acting strangely ever since Clara's death. Daniel confronted her, and after hours of intense questioning, Sarah broke down. She confessed that Clara had discovered a secret, a dark secret, that someone in town was willing to kill to protect. But before Sarah could reveal the name, she was silenced forever. Daniel found her body the next day, her death staged to look like a suicide. But Daniel knew better. He was getting closer to the truth, and someone was desperate to stop him. With no one left to turn to, Daniel decided to take one last, desperate gamble. He returned to the cemetery and installed another hidden camera, this time pointing it at Sarah's grave. If Clara had come back to warn him, maybe Sarah would too. That night, Daniel watched the footage with bated breath. At first, there was nothing. But then, just like before, a figure appeared. It was Sarah. She looked just as she had in life, but her eyes were filled with fear. She knelt by her grave and whispered something into the camera, a name. Daniel's blood ran cold as he realized the truth. The person responsible for Clara's death was someone he had trusted implicitly. Someone who had been by his side through everything. Someone who had a secret so dark they were willing to kill to keep it hidden. Daniel knew what he had to do. He confronted the killer, armed with the evidence he had gathered. But the killer was prepared. A violent struggle ensued, and Daniel was left fighting for his life. In the end, he managed to overpower the killer, but not without sustaining serious injuries. As the police arrived and took the killer away, Daniel collapsed by Clara's grave. He looked up at the night sky, tears streaming down his face. "I did it, Clara," he whispered. "I found the truth." And for a moment he thought he saw her, standing in the moonlight, smiling at him. Then she was gone, and Daniel knew she could finally rest in peace. If you found this story touching and inspiring, please like the video, share it with others, and leave your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for following along, and we'll see you next time for more uplifting tales.